Thank you for tuning into Literary Blend, a publishing podcast. I'm your host, Demi Michelle Schwartz. There's no perfect recipe for chasing a dream in the publishing industry, but I hope the conversations on this show give you the ingredients you need to bake yours into reality. So let's flip the page and get into this chapter of Literary Blend. Hello, friends. Welcome back to Literary Blend. Today's chapter is Why It's Important to Read as a Writer. And joining me for a fabulous conversation is one of my author friends. Please give a warm welcome to Cassidy Jackson. Hey, Cassidy.
Hey, Demi.
How are you?
Well, it's been a wild ride. Honestly, I can't even begin to tell you the amount of stuff my brain has had to go through this past week. Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness. Well, hopefully your brain is going to feel better when we dive into our chat because this is going to be fun.
I hope so. My brain needs a break.
Perfect. Well, I'm so excited to chat with you all about why it's important to read as a writer. But before we do that, I would love for you to share a little about yourself and your ventures as an author so far.
Yeah, I'd love to. So, hey guys, as Demi said, I'm Cassidy Jackson. My pronouns are she, her. My name is a pen name. And so I like to keep my personal life and my author life pretty separate. And that's just personal preference for me. I am currently a junior in university studying environmental policy. Very, very different from Literary Blend and the writing realm. I am a contemporary and dystopian fiction author. My genre, or those are my genres. My age range is probably YA to upper YA to new adult. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's awesome. So I'm really curious about the pen name. So what was your process of picking it?
In picking that pen name, so I grew up reading. My family, all four of us, me, my dad, my mom, my younger sister, we're all huge readers. And so my dad would pick up books for my sister and I. And one of the books that he picked out was called The Mother-Daughter Book Club by Heather Vogel-Frederick. One of the main characters, so basically it follows 5 girls from 6th grade to basically their senior year of high school. So I grew up with these girls. And one of the girls, her name is Cassidy Sloan. And I related to her so much. Like, she didn't really have a lot of girlfriends. She loved sports and she just loved being herself. And so that's where Cassidy comes from. And then Jackson, my pen name, last name, actually comes from Percy Jackson.
Yes, I thought so.
Yeah. So Demi and I have had previous conversations about how absolutely unhealthily obsessed I am with Percy Jackson and Rick Riordan. And the fact that I'm an author and my pen name comes from 2 characters whom I absolutely adored growing up, that makes it even more special to me.
Yes, perfect. I love hearing this story. Thank you so much for sharing.
Of course.
Yeah. So, speaking of reading and writing, let's dive into our topic for this chapter of Literary Blend, all about why it's important to read as a writer. There are many reasons why, and there's no way Cassidy and I can possibly cover this all in a half an hour or so, but we're going to cover as much as possible. And the first big thing I want to chat about with you, Cassidy, is that as writers, reading is very important because we're essentially supporting our peers. One day we wish to have our books on shelves alongside these incredible authors that we're growing up reading and reading now. And so I think it's really important to support other authors because when it's our turn, we would love for other authors to support us as well.
Oh, of course. Yeah, definitely. It's so important to read your craft because every craft, whether it's creative or you're taking classes in college or high school or whatever, practice makes perfect. And for most writers, it's practicing writing, but also reading alongside and knowing kind of what you want to do as an author based on the authors that you're reading at the time.
Right. Absolutely. And I think too, as we're reading, if you read a lot, a lot, a lot, your brain is going to subconsciously start absorbing certain conventions like sentence structure and pattern and paragraph structure and narrative style, grammar. You're going to grow your vocabulary. And I've noticed, like, especially once I started to dive into writing, when I'm reading books, I'm reading them for enjoyment, of course, but I also have an author hat on too, kind of analyzing, okay, I'm very invested in this scene and I'm very immersed in the scene. What is the author doing that is making me feel so immersed? Is it the setting details? Is it the realistic dialogue? Is it the tension? So, when you read a lot, you start to notice things and you start to absorb things. So then when you go to write your story, you're naturally drawing on what you learn from reading. And craft books too are incredible. But beyond that, I think the best way to learn how to be an author is to read and just absorb what other authors are doing and find what resonates most with you.
Exactly. Yeah. So, along the lines of that, I started reading when I was 5, and I'm 21 right now. So, I have spent the vast majority of my life soaking up books. And actually, when you said like writers are kind of that sponge that just soak up books, I'm realizing my English professors and my English teachers, they've never had to say, Cassidy, this isn't grammatically correct. Cassie, this sentence structure is horrible. It was all more about like the nitty gritty details. So reading also helps like with other stuff as well, whether it's, school and writing, because sentence structure, if you're structuring an email, like you got to know how to structure it
Right.
somehow, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. For sure. And I think when you look at publishing as a business, you're going to be having to write query letters and a synopsis for your story and pitching agents and just emailing communications back and forth. I think you have a really great point in that writing extends beyond just the craft in our novels that we're writing, but also in the other areas of the business that we're going to have to write things for.
Yeah, most people actually don't believe that writing is a business
Yeah.
going into it. Like, I certainly didn't. I was
Mm-mm.
just like, "Oh, I love reading. I'm gonna start writing." It's like, no. It's something that, in the year that I've been seriously considering and seriously in the writing quote unquote business, I'm learning it's so much more. It's not just a hobby for me anymore. It's something that I will seriously and am still seriously considering making a part of my life
Right.
for the rest of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really great transition into another point I had to bring up, which is if you're reading a lot and more importantly, books that are coming out now. Like, yes, we love the classics and we love the big hit series, but if you're reading as well along with that, newer books that are coming out now, you're going to have a better understanding of the current market. And that can come down to what are readers looking for now, or what are publishers buying right now, or, in terms of topics and genres, what's selling, and also what the word count ranges expectations are, and things like that. And also, like, with a lot of diversity now, and all these things, like, if you're reading books that are coming out now, you're going to have a better understanding of what the traditional landscape is leaning toward at the moment. But that being said, though, I wouldn't recommend writing to trends.
I mean, you can if you want to, but it's best not to,
No.
just out of personal preference.
Right, because also with trends, what you're reading right now, those books were sold like to the publishers a year and a half, 2 years ago. And so that trend is going to be gone pretty much by the time you crank out a book to fit the trend and pitch it. So I think it's really important beyond the trends is to recognize what is working, what are people looking for, and also too to understand where your book can fit into the landscape, because when you get into querying, you have to have comp titles and agents want those to be books published within the last 5 years. So along with just supporting your author peers, staying up to date with what is going on with the publishing industry is really important.
Exactly, yeah. I'm actually staring at Valley Verified by Kyla Zhao. And the reason that I love her books and also R.F. Kuang, the author of Babel, is because they're Asian authors and I'm Asian American. And so to see that come out, like, yes, I'm supporting my peers. Like, go, they're awesome. They're also great people. I love them as people and writers. I've learned so much from them just reading their novels about, the voice of Asian authors out there. Like, I'm going to be one of them.
Right.
And that just makes me so happy because I can join them.
Right. Absolutely. And you bring up a really great point there too with reading widely, like reading authors who are like you, but also authors who aren't, because I think non-Asian American authors can definitely learn from those authors too. And it's also just building empathy and understanding of the world around you and the people in it and diversity and all of that is huge now. And so when you're writing your book, if you want to create a diverse cast of characters, by immersing yourself in authentic stories by different people from different backgrounds, you're going to widen your understanding, not only as an author too, but just as a person. Like you're going to become a more empathetic and understanding person if you read work by people who not are always like you.
Exactly. Yeah. Growing up, I read a lot of stories by white authors. And now looking back, I'm like, okay, there was a reason I started out writing, you know, the first novel that I ever wrote at 13. I think unintentionally, the entire cast was white. That's what I read growing up. And so you bring up a good point about reading diverse authors. Yes, it's good, but don't read diverse authors because people are forcing you to read diverse authors.
Right,
Read diverse authors so that you can learn about other cultures and
right.
expand your worldview.
Mhm. Absolutely. 100%. Absolutely. And also too, it's really great to read as a writer because writing is all about the imagination.
Oh yeah.
And I think whenever you are feeling in a state of you're not feeling creative or you just are really busy in your everyday life and you need an escape. Yes, books are an escape, but they can offer a window into discovering your imagination again, and seeing what other people do can spark your ideas. And reading all these different books, you're seeing what other people are doing, but then you can think, oh, see how this is happening here, but I've never seen this thing before. What if I can do that? So by immersing yourself in other stories, you are definitely allowing your imagination to thrive.
What's funny is, Demi, you and I are completely different reader authors because when I read stories, I read them for enjoyment, but my author hat is just like, okay, do they structure the story well? Like very broad details. And meanwhile, you're just like, oh, I don't know if they should have put this sentence here. I could have done something else. I'm like, no. Since I started out as a reader, my reader hat is so much stronger than my writing hat.
I love that. I love that so much. Why do you think that is?
My entire family is very STEM orientated. And so the funny thing is we're a family of literary, like we love literary everything. And yet we're such strong STEM people. But in a way, this because we're doing STEM every day in school or in work, that's just like, okay, reading for fun kind of takes a background a little bit. And I say this as literally I have flashbacks of my parents going, Cassie, it's time for dinner. I'm like, yeah, 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 I'm reading, in bed. And they had to call me like 3, 4 times. And they're like, Cassie, like, come down for dinner. And it's just like, it's such a weird thing to be in a STEM family, but also a STEM reading family. Because they're
Yeah.
very different.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So something else I wanted to chat about is reading both in your chosen genre and outside your chosen genre. So first let's chat about reading in your chosen genre. So going back to understanding the market, if you read books that are coming out in your genre, you're getting a good understanding of where the genre is going or word count expectations changing, that kind of thing. And also too, I think it's really great to read in your genre because again, you're going to be absorbing as the reader, what are your expectations? What are the unspoken rules of fantasy or dystopian or romance or whatever you write? Because if you are a reader of that genre and you go into books with certain expectations and you want to reach the same audience as those books are reaching, then keeping it in mind is really a great thing when you're writing your own books in that genre to know, okay, what do my readers expect for this genre? What are they expecting to see when they open my book?
Yeah, that's actually funny because I'm a contemporary author, but first I started my main work is purely dystopian. And all I have to go on is, books that came out, 5, 10 years ago. I think the last dystopian that I read was published maybe like in the early 2010s or like maybe 2017. I don't want to call it like a dying genre because it's coming back. But for me, I have a lot more comps. And for those of you who don't know, comp titles are those books who are similar to yours that readers, if they enjoyed this published book, they will most likely enjoy your book as well. In a way, it's so important, like Demi mentioned earlier, to find comp titles that are very, very recent because then the publisher also knows, hey, you've done your research.
Yeah.
The agent knows, hey, you've done your research. You know what you're doing in this industry, which is actually a caveat. Nobody actually knows what they're doing in the publishing industry because it changes every hour.
That's perfect. Oh my goodness. You're exactly right because calm titles are important for like every stage. They're important when you're querying because you want to show an agent where your book fits into the market. But also when you get onto like sub, like the editors are going to know where it fits into the market. Whenever you look on the back of a book that you bought at the store, it's going to say fans of this author or this book meets this book. Like it's all over and it's exactly right. You're letting readers know if you like these books or this author, you will like mine. So that's why reading widely in your genre will give you a wide pool of or a big pool of books to look at and say, okay, this one has a friends to lovers plot, kind of like how mine does, or this one has an international setting that's kind of similar to mine. So you can kind of pull these elements from other books and show how your book reflects those.
Exactly. And then I'm going to touch on reading outside of your genre just for a little
Yes,
bit.
absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to go there too. So perfect. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. So for me, I read outside of my genre mostly for enjoyment. It's not for research purposes. It's like if I want to pick up a fantasy, I'll pick up a fantasy. If I want to pick up a thriller, I'll pick up a thriller, like yada, yada, yada. For that, I've noticed that I soak up tones like an absolute sponge. Like I've known one of my friends, my very, very close friends, I think when we were both maybe 13, 14 years old, they were like, hey, Cassie, you kind of write like Rick Riordan. And now I'm realizing, yeah, I've soaked up sarcastic tones from authors that I've read, like Ali Carter, John Green, Rick Riordan, Lemony Snicket. Like they don't write in my, age range, or Ali Carter does and John Green does, but they don't really write in the genre that I write. And my dystopian soaks up those tones and just kind of mushes them all together to kind of make it my own. So that's another thing that reading definitely helps writers with.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that so much, and I completely agree. And the other thing with reading outside your genre too is I found that you can strengthen areas of your own writing through immersing yourself in specific genres. Like, for example, I started in the mystery and thriller space, and I'm all about suspense and tension and anticipation and all these things. And when I started writing fantasy, I still need tension in that story. I still need suspense. That's what keeps readers turning the page. And so I found that even though I was writing a different genre, I was still able to pull in my suspense strengths into that genre. On the other hand, when I first started writing, I felt like I lacked in setting description. But when I started reading fantasy with like all this incredible world building, I noticed when I started to write fantasy that my sensory details were a lot stronger because I immersed myself in that genre. Same goes for if your book has a strong romance subplot, but you don't really read or write a lot of romance, you're not sure how to authentically depict a romance plot. You can read a romance book and see how romance authors do it. So there's a lot of different elements in other genres that even if you don't specifically write that genre, you can pull those things into your own writing.
Exactly. And you can call it research.
Yeah. Literally, it's all research. That's the thing. Like, I think what you mentioned a couple of times about reading for enjoyment, I think that's first and foremost. We read for enjoyment, but as writers, we are naturally absorbing these things. We're not always thinking, let me see how they like did character development, or let me see. No, like, we're not always doing that, but as authors too, our brains are automatically absorbing these things, and in a later date, they can resurface and be like, huh, okay, setting details. I read this book not too long ago. They use all these cool sensory language details, and I can work that in. So I think reading for enjoyment, but also allowing your brain to absorb all these things you're reading will really pay off when you start to write.
Oh yeah, definitely first and foremost, read for enjoyment. That is definitely something I am stressing. If you don't enjoy reading, then and you want to become a writer, it is going to be extremely hard because you can only learn so much without reading books.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
all I'm going to say on that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Well, one of the last points I wanted to chat with you about is we've been talking a lot about reading published books and all of that, but I know you and I have a lot of author friends and have read a ton of unpublished manuscripts too. And I think in that instance, it's amazing too because we're supporting our peers who are at the same level of us as us who aren't published yet, or maybe they're queer, or maybe they just got agented. And I think you can also learn a lot about what books are being written right now because like I said earlier, the books that are getting published were sold to publishers year and a half, 2 years ago. But if you're reading work by other authors and your friends who are currently writing, you're getting a glimpse into what are authors currently writing right now in 2024.
Yeah. So I absolutely have writer friends where we just exchange manuscripts.
Yeah.
And that's a thing in case people don't know. Unpublished authors and published authors, they just have author friends and they just kind of do a little crisscross thing.
Yeah.
But for me, it's a little bit different because I also have market readers. It's something I'm starting new in 2024. I am very lucky in the fact that I have reader friends who know nothing about the publishing industry. Good, because I think if they tried to get into it right now, their brains would hurt. Um, and I'm like, hey, this is my novel. It's a work in progress, a whip. Would you buy this? And so far, I haven't heard anything, but we're all STEM majors. So it's going to be a while. But yeah,
Yeah.
just the fact that they're soaking up a little bit of me, the part that I don't get to show a lot of people. And that's the thing, like with unfinished manuscripts, they're works in progress, but there's also a lot of heart and soul in reading those unpolished, unpublished manuscripts
Yeah.
because it's like getting a piece of an author friend that maybe you just didn't know existed before.
Yeah, nothing makes me happier than reading unpublished manuscripts. It's very fun and it just makes me excited because then it's like, okay, cool. In 3, 4 years, whenever this gets published, I get to shout that I read this when it was in its draft form.
Yeah, in the disaster draft form.
Fabulous. Well, this has been a wonderful chat, Cassidy. Are there any final thoughts you would like to share on why it's important to read as a writer?
Honestly, if you're looking to start your writing career, no matter what age you are, go ahead and do it. Be as brave as you want to be in the time period that you're given because things can and will change your life. Like becoming an author and getting on social media, that has changed my life dramatically. I've gained so much more insight, so much more like respect for the authors whom I read growing up. And actually, I have a podcast centered around I produce it, I host it, it's basically a one Cassie show as of right now called Cassie's Crafting Conundrum, where I highlight Gen Z authors and their real life and fictional stories. And Demi's actually on there.
Yeah. I just made Gen Z. I was born in 1997.
Barely made it by the skin of your teeth, Demi.
Perfect. Well, I love those final points. I love that so, so much. Well, that brings us to the end of our chat about why it's important to read as a writer. But that means that we've made it to the plot twist. Uh-oh. Are you ready, Cassidy, for the plot twist?
There's a plot twist?
So the plot twist, well, as writers and readers, we love plot twists in books, so I thought it'd be fun to throw in a little plot twist at the end of the episode where I will ask you a random bookish question. Are you ready?
Sure, go for it.
So it's already been well established that you love Percy Jackson, and my question for you is, if you were in the PJO universe, who would your girly parent be?
Cabin 3, Poseidon.
Perfect. Love it. Is there a reason?
If you listen to my podcast, I say I grew up in Northern California. And my family actually has said that I take to water like a fish. You put me on any type of water, in any type of water, I will flourish. Like, I love getting on frozen water, like ice skating. I love it. It's very hard to get me off the beach or out of a swimming pool. Like, but also, I love marine life. My degree when I first got into college was marine science, actually. And so the ocean has always held like a very special place in my heart. And I know, Demi, you're like, oh my gosh, that was absolutely immediate. And I'm like, yeah, people have asked me this all the time. So I know the answer to this question.
I love it. Mine would be Apollo.
Ah, I see it.
Yeah, music. I love the sun. Yeah, definitely Apollo. Well, Cassidy, thank you so much for joining me on this show. Can you please share with everybody where they can check out your podcast and also anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Yeah. So Cassie's Crafting Conundrum can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts. Just under that name, you can find me on Instagram and Threads, um, in the handle at Cass Jackson _22. Yes, I have a Twitter account, but right now that is inactive. So you're not going to find much on there.
Okay, awesome. Well, Cassidy, thank you so much again for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Demi. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us to the end of this chapter of Literary Blend with Cassidy Jackson, all about why it's important to read as a writer. If you enjoyed our conversation, please consider giving the podcast a review and leaving it 5 stars so other listeners just like you can discover it. If you have friends in the publishing industry you feel would enjoy the show as well, please pass it along. And of course, until we flip to the next chapter, happy reading and writing.